Welcome back to the latest episode of TT Plays. My name's Sung Soo, and joining me today is the Master of Water, Killydis himself, and we are going to talk about the state of water with all these expansions. Killy, how are you? How have you been doing?
Hi, Sung-Soo. I'm doing good. Thank you for having me here again. I really appreciate it.
Of course, I'm excited you volunteered to come back. Normally, I have to harangue people, so it's great to have you back. I couldn't think of someone better to talk about water, and man, there's been a lot of cards coming out here. Obviously, Mercurial Hearts did a lot. So, where did you want to start here?
Let's talk about the meta of the state of water, right? Because we just started the Mercurial Hearts season. There's only one major event that just finished, right? We have Ascent Taipei that just finished, and then we have the Luxera's map open that we can kind of talk about and maybe talk about some regional differences, right? So, like for example, for NA, at least in the Luxera's map, water was also not very well represented, kind of similar to Ascent Taipei. It's a little unfortunate, but it makes a lot of sense. When you think of a new format, a lot of times the aggro decks shine. And so, water to its affinity is not very aggressive. But there are some very cool decks that came out of it that people have discovered early on, such as from the Luxera maps open, there was a very cool Diana list that was using Dahlia. That was just kind of like using it as a very tempo-oriented, maybe a fish-style deck. If you play Magic a lot, where you have like this one big body that kind of pokes them down for a while, and then you control the hand and board. And then there are some Nikos floating around a lot. Before any of the big events that were happening, Nico was talked about a lot, and a lot of people were talking about how crazy some of the new support Nico got and made it decently viable. So it's very cool. It's very cool to see that. But in terms of representation of meta, water at Luxera's map was maybe 20%, and then recently at Ascent Taipei it was only like 11%. I think it was very small. Yeah, and so I heard from the casters, right? They were saying in SCA no one likes to play water, and so it just shows they just don't do it. They have a certain philosophy on card advantage and play styles, and that's their thing. But yeah, early in the meta, water is not looking so hot. But I think now that we have some established giant tournaments, people have something to prepare for. What won recently? Wind Allies Automaton?
Wind Allies.
Yeah, and so that is a target now, and then we have Wind Tristan, and I think if you have a target in mind, you can play water to counter those archetypes.
Yeah, I think that's a great mindset, and water has answers to almost everything, I'd say. But it's hard to fit them all cohesively into a deck, right? A friend of mine plays water, and he takes all these answers, and at the end of the day, it's a bunch of answers and like very little actual tempo or pressure itself, right?
Right.
It's just like dirtles, and then eventually loses because it can't close out a game.
I think that's another thing that you have to kind of consider with water in mind when you build it is not only do you have to have the answers, but you also have to consider the ways of winning the game yourself, right? In a reasonable pace or amount of time. And so you can't just play these long, dirtily games if you don't win game one, right? That's a problem. But now that there's targets and then there's the new change to the sideboard options, I think it benefits water a lot. Having 15 possible cards for your sideboard to include is huge. I think you can tailor pick your answers for the matchups you want.
No, I think that's a great channel, right? We have some amazing floodgates, we have some amazing disruptions, Wounded Gates, Song of Frost. I mean, you can easily swap in and out lunettes. There are so many great water cards to jam into that 15. That's a great shout out. So I think we can agree that there are basically like two established water archetypes, right? We have water allies, right, and we have what I call slow control, right? Those are kind of the two bigger pillars in water. Would you agree there?
Yeah, for the most part, I agree. I think water can also, if you're not playing water allies, there's sometimes water allies associated to water tempo. They may be a little bit more on the disruption package, or they would attempt to find critical openings to finish your opponent off. When I think of water tempo, I really think of Water Diana or even Water Assassin. So either
Okay.
Triss or Xander kind of fills that niche a little bit more. I think the Water allies are closer to like the Tony decks or to the Lorraine style decks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They have higher burst potential if they're either going super wide with Inspiring Call, or they have the really tall attacks with heavy swings in their packages.
Yeah, and I think those archetypes basically survived, right? Like you said, once the meta kind of settles down, I think the water decks will know, what cards they need to bring, what 15 they need to pack in their sideboard, and I suspect the water allies / water tempo and maybe even slow control will be pretty competitive decks. I think. Do you agree?
I hope so. We haven't. It hasn't been really proven yet, right? So like the one time in the AOC meta during Nats where water was abundant, right, in our national formats and maybe some previous regionals. But after that, after Nats, like water was like even overseas and SEA or in the other region, Oceanic, they just didn't play water, and it kind of carried over that mindset carried over into Worlds, and water was kind of disregarded still. And so hopefully this new meta will prove different, but that was the current trend before, right? There was some inkling of water, and then it got kind of closed out.
Yeah, I mean, there was one water deck in the top 16 for Worlds, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, and actually I think they did very well, right? Were they in the top 8?
I believe they took 6th place. I don't know the person, but I remember it was just like a Crux Water allies, right?
Right. Yes. And with Taipei, there was also one water in the top 8 as well, and so it has representation, which is, I think, it's very good and healthy for the meta right now. That every color is viable, but for water to really shine, I think we just have to have a more established meta at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's great from a conversion rate standpoint, right? Water is coming in at the lowest represented thing,
right?
And they're still putting someone into the top 8, right? So if you want a deck with a good conversion rate, I think like water is representing it.
That's true. Good point.
All right, so with the introduction of this set, Mercurial Hearts, there are a couple other fringe, maybe unexplored archetypes, and I'm going to throw them at you. You tell me which ones you think have legs to them. We have self-mill, we have power cells, we have domains, and then of course we have Nico. Do you think I'm missing anything there?
I think maybe maybe potions.
Okay.
I think what's an interesting point, because I've been doing deck building in the background, but I'm a little off season right now, so like I have no big events until December, until that Accent that happens. I'll play on the online regionals, I'll play in Yetis weekly, but I don't have anything super big to prepare for, other than helping the teammates out for other events that they're attending. But self-mill, I mean, I think it kind of shows with Nico, right? Where they use Icebound Slam, and then they have, well, that's not fair to say. I think, what was it? It's there's that
Ravishing
fractal
Finale.
There's a new fractal.
Rain.
Rain, yes. So that's the self-mill card. Mm-hmm. And then Icebound Slam is very evident in Nico that's being played right now, and those synergize super well with each other. And so I think there's something there. Self-mill is a deck that you have to think before you even play, right? You have to consider it heavily in terms of deck construction, right? You have to consider the number of water cards or the number of float cards you need to play with to hit a critical mass where milling yourself is worth it, right? Instead of milling your opponent out. And so I think that strategy is definitely pushed in this set, MRC, where it has like a little bit in the previous sets, but nothing to make or conceptualize as a main deck. And so I think moving forward, maybe there are still more self-mill strategies outside of Guardian, right? Nico has been the most explored. That could be reviewed. I think maybe there's some self-mill. And I think obviously the Diana deck that's using Dahlia was another good example of self-mill there. And then who knows, maybe Cleric, right? No one has really talked about Primordial Ritual, which is a great self-mill card that puts float into your bin. its flow itself, and then you can sack allies that are neutral or flow as well to kind of maintain parity in terms of card advantage.
Yeah, I think those are great points. Dahlia has impressed me a lot. I actually was in a practice session with someone who was running her with Diana, and if you don't answer her, she does a lot of work. She's not friendly.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's very scary. Range X equal to water. It's pretty much the water version of erupting, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Sorry, my dogs are going crazy. I'm sure you can hear them.
Yeah,
I didn't think about that. It is kind of like erupting. So
yeah, so very cool. Definitely can be explored more in MRC. The next category, power cells. When you think of power cells, you think automaton. You think of power cells in general. The effect it has giving automatons buffs. I don't think water really fits that style. Especially with the water allies that are automaton based, right? Like we have powered swordsman. You get a power cell when it dies. Like that doesn't help. Like if you want to have allies, automaton allies to power up, I mean, like okay. But I think cell converter and power defender are the most two interesting of the cell generators for water. Cell converter obviously being that I can do one at the end of every turn, and then the really interesting thing about power defender is that its power cells entered into play not tapped, where a lot of the other ones do enter rested. So something I've learned that I've explored recently is that with power defender, if they don't finish it off on the first hit, maybe because it's a 1/4, it's a relatively big body, you can get a power cell from the first on hit, and then you can sack the power cell to retaliate and finish off whatever remaining attacker that's trying to finish off power defender. So I think those are very cool in terms of power cells, but also another territory that's not very explored very well. I think water can generate a lot of power cells quickly, and maybe that plays into the big Overlord. Yeah, I haven't explored that area yet, but I really want to as well. Maybe there's some thoughts around that with power or with water. In terms of domains, I think domains is an interesting spot. You have domains that are like rain that mills yourself and your opponent, which is very interesting. That can kind of fuel the self-mill strategy. And then there's just a lot of good water domains at the moment. You have that one, and then you have Crystallian Ruins, which is very good at slowing down the game if you're playing against aggressive strategies. Is there a water domain Tony lists? Not EK style, maybe. I don't know, but I think there's enough support that if you explore that, you probably won't be terribly disappointed in what you discover. Nico is great. It's good in the meta. It's okay, right? Like there's Nico finishes that have done very well in Ascent Taipei and in some of the earlier events that people are making videos of it. Ravaging Finale is really insane it hits
when it works.
6.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, like you mill 20, 40 cards. That's game ending. Also, it attacks two fronts, right? You attack their life and their deck, and so. Ravaging Finale with Magebane Lash is a lot of damage if you think about it. It's like 10 plus, 15, maybe 12, 13, who knows, but that type of hit is very strong. Even if you don't mill them, right, you most likely will just knock them out with the damage alone. And so that's why Nico is pretty good. I think Weebs of the Shore did very good with Nico's kit. When it comes to the other level 2 champs like Pohawk and Vanitas, I don't know what they're thinking, but they don't seem that super strong at the moment. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but like with Calamity Cannon, you have to wait a turn for you to take its advantage. That doesn't sound too hot to me. And then Vanitas sounds like the schemer, right? I mean, they're very thematic. I just have to say they're very thematic with the other champions.
I've been playing a water Polkark list. It's not bad, but yeah, the cannon's not as good as. There's nothing nearly as good for either of them as Ravishing Finale, right?
Right, exactly. When you think of a finisher, that's a good one.
Yeah, nothing feels worse than getting Song of Frost and then Calamity Cannon. I can tell you that. So.
And then the one thing about potions that I want to mention is that we have the new water potion. What is it called?
Aquavitae?
Yeah,
Aquavitae?
yeah, Aquavitae, which it's a potion that replaces itself. And why is that so important? I think in terms of deck construction, 8 is like the magic number to start doing things. 8 or 12. Like if you have 12 cards that are kind of similar in function, or at least help you go neutral, it's a very good starting point with Aquavitae and then Serum. Those are both neutral potions that you can just play on turn 1, and then you can play all of the infusions. That you have good potions for infusion support. And so I think that's a territory that's also not explored very well, which I imagine is something that is a thing. It has to be a thing. I think from my testing as well with just water in general, I found that with Cerulean Decree and Frostbind, 8 is a critical number or mass of counterspells that feels very good to have. Like you feel like you'll open one in your hand and you're in a position to say no often. Whereas before, just having Frostbind, you may have it sometimes or you don't, right? And you have to bluff a little bit more, but it feels like having 8 cards that are similar in function is a good starting point for any type of deck construction.
Yeah, that's a great point. And let's jump into some of the best cards in water, I think, from this set. And you hit on one of them already, and that's Cerulean Decree. And Cerulean Decree, obviously incredibly impactful when you play it. It's up there on the screen right now, right? Imbue 3, it negates, you give -3 to an attack, or you draw a card in your memory. And Imbue is fascinating. Imbue has done so much to skew my deck building, because like you talked about, I'm really concerned, like evaluating the card without the Imbue and with the Imbue, it's very different.
Very different.
And yeah, I almost always want to be able to hit this Imbue number. So I'm cutting out normal cards for Erisana. I'm cutting out Astra cards for Tony. I'm cutting out Neos cards. What do you think of Cerulean Decree and its impact on water?
I think it's a staple for certain archetypes. It obviously doesn't go in everything, but as the slow control archetypes, it's a plus. It's a necessity, I think. Cerulean Decree is wow. It's modal, right? It's the first set of modal options in the game that have more than 2, I think. And so it's I think it's one of the best cards for that archetype. When you're trying to play tempo or you're trying to play control, it's an automatic inclusion, and how it impacts deck construction is very significant, right? You got to hit 3, and then if you're trying to consider that in your opening hand, you gotta have 4 water cards. That's like at least over 30 water cards, right? You're probably hitting close to 40, maybe 36. But yeah, that's not a lot of room for anything else when you try to fit against that criteria.
No, especially you talk about you putting this in the controller tempo deck, so I probably want a dungeon guide. So I'm 36, I'm 4 dungeon guides, I'm 40. I've only got 20 cards left in the deck, whether that's advanced element or normals. And like you talked about, Cerulean Decree is just never not useful, right?
Right.
Early game, phenomenal for that counter negate this theoretical threat, right? Maybe you're going to take the -3 ally attack. I think that's the least useful, but there's never a chance where I don't want to draw additional cards into my memory. So I just think the card is gangbusters. I love Cerulean Decree. I'm happy I opened mine and didn't have to buy any, because that card went for way more than I thought it was going to.
Yeah, and another cool thing with Cerulean Decree is like if you just by chance open Cerulean Decree and Frostbind, you can like guarantee hard counter something, which is something you don't get to do before. Will Weebs of the Shore ever print a hard counter? I don't know, but we are.
It did.
Oh, other than Astro Seal, before Advanced Elements,
the Assassin card.
Oh, Incapacitate. Okay. More generic hard counter.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No. I want Counterspell in Grand Archive.
It's just Astro Seal. I understand you don't want to play Astro, but that's what you have to do.
I know. But there are some very cool line where you can just Cerulean Decree into a Frostbind and catch people off guard. Like that. That's a very powerful sequence I've done before in my matchups. So.
All right, some other cards that spring to my mind. I love the Vapor Jet. I am curious what you think of it. So the Vapor Jet, for people who don't know, I'm not, I'm saying this really. It's a material that costs 2. That's right, it costs 2. It is unit link, and then Guardian class bonus. If damage would be dealt to the link unit, prevent 1 of that damage. What do you think of Vapor Jet?
I personally like Vapor Jet Shield too. So I guess from my experience before in at Worlds in 3v3, I played Water Tony, and so one of the things that I always was trying to do is improve the ally matchups, and I think Vapor Jet Shield is very, very strong, especially against the fire ally decks, where they can't interrupt it. Where, you know, in water you have Zephyr, you have Fracturize, or in wind you have Zephyr, in water you have Fracturize, but it's very impactful against the fire ally decks, like the low to the ground Xander, want to poison dagger you to death. Vapor Shield is phenomenal in that case. I found Vapor Shield to have other applications as well, especially against Luxem. Surprisingly, it's decent into Luxem, where they don't want to waste an Excalibur on it and then, you know, target your other things. More importantly, it drags the game on very long for that matchup. And yeah, it's just very powerful. I think something like this in combination of Stormer Shields will make you feel invincible for several turns. So
yeah, like Vapor Jet can be incredibly demoralizing for your opponent. I've loved it. My only complaint is, like, with the new sideboard rules, I don't want a ton of regalia items over there, but that's okay. It's a first world problem.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so one of the cards that I think has been a little more polarizing has been the Icebound Slam. Now, I see people that say it's like the best card, the most busted card to come out of the set, and other people say it's incredibly overrated. It costs 7. Class bonus of Guardian will bring it down to 2. It's a 3 attack, and then on attack, put 5 cards of your deck into your graveyard. If there are 5 or more water cards, an Icebound Slam gets +5. So it is sometimes a 7 for 3. Normally, you're hoping it's a 5 for 8. What do you think of Icebound Slam?
I'm a low risk taker, so I don't like the idea of milling the top 5 of my deck and whiffing. Like, if I ever whiff Icebound, I would probably never play it in my life. But if the decks are constructed right and you take statistics in play, Icebound is very, very strong. I cannot deny that. People are playing it. It hits that magical number of 3, right? It can clear an ally, an early ally, or if you totally build your deck around it, it hits for 8 guaranteed, right? Like, that's insane amounts of pressure. Back-to-back Icebound Slams, for people who are not going to level 1 immediately, it's just over. So it has a lot of implications. It has a lot of applications. I mean, and supporting, the self-mill strategy. Milling a bunch of float can help you level up efficiently and deal with the board, right? That's when you look for cards that do that in the game, there's not that many that does that. Like the first one that I ever played was Refracting Missile, and I did it for 1, and 1 damage was enough for me. So I have to imagine Icebound Slam is very powerful. I haven't personally played it. I know I've seen it in the other deck lists, and I've seen videos of them just like slamming and milling 3 flow, and that must be the best feeling in the world, right? You get your free next 2 levels up. I think it's a very good card. I personally wouldn't play it because I'm a low risk taker. I like to have a little bit more control in what I do, and how I mill, and so that's why I guess my favorite card is Tide Diviner, where I can control that, right? I can control the mill 1, 2, 3. 5 is just such a large number of cards to mill. I might be afraid to mill my own dungeon guides, like I don't want that to happen. So
yeah, I think that's a great shout out. I settled on 2 in my deck, and I think what you said in the beginning was the most important realization for me. If I just use my entire hand to kill that 3 tough ally that's important, that's okay. That's good enough. And then sometimes Icebound Slam is a home run for me. But I fully get wanting to be a little bit more in control there. So what do you think of Lost in Vault?
That's probably one of my more favorite cards in Water. It's so powerful. I just like how it's a float. It eats float. Um, I think it's very powerful for the fact that it costs nothing to use. So it has a lot of good applications in like balancing Killydis. It can put you under influence when you need to, and probably let you recover back that influence. I think it's a very versatile card. It enables turns where what I used to run Chilling Touch for was the turn where I would have Frostborn Paladin and Chilling Touch with an 8-card hand, which is like going second. The play is to Chilling Touch, Frostborn Paladin, consume the Chilling Touch, have a 3/4, clear an ally, or just have it up for good defense. Most likely clear an ally, and then have 3 in hand to play an interaction spell. With Lost in Thought, you can do it with less cards. You can do it with 7 now. And so I find that line very powerful. That's something Lost in Thought can enable. And then it has good early game application and good late game application where you have a bunch of float. You can convert a lot of that float to plus cards. And that the fact that Lost in Thought you can pay X as much as you want. You don't have to consume X. It can also be a way of control banishing for anything, or leveling, or a way to control what you need to be in your memory. So I think it's a very versatile card. If you asked me before MRC, like what would be a water creative shock, I would have never guessed Lost in Thought. That's why I think the power level of Lost in Thought is the equivalent of creative shock for fire and water.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Lost in Thought's been amazing. Once I realized I could overpay into it and I didn't need to banish that many, I'm like, okay, this card's
right.
ridiculous. It does basically anything I could want it to do.
Yeah.
All right. We talked about we talked about Ravishing Finale. We talked a little bit about Fractal of Rain. We talked a little bit about Crystalline Ruins. Are there any other cards that really jumped out at you? I mean, we've gone over quite a few of them now. Did Seaside Ringleader, I know, had a lot of buzz going into it. I haven't seen a lot of Ringleaders being played.
I think that card is not played just because Slime Sovereign Sylvie is so much. It's just like there isn't a Water Slime Sovereign deck yet, and so I'm guessing that's the reason why it's not played. The slime package itself is so good; it's hard to fit more cards into that package.
Storm Slime is just nuts.
Yes, the slime deck is nuts in general. But I think if someone was trying to work on a normal animal beast generic Sylvie list, I think that card is really good. It's neutral, right? So like cards that replace themselves are always powerful in this game. But yeah, I'm surprised there's not a lot of play to it. I don't think it's very hard to use. I think you can just turn 1 play it and banish 1 from paying for it to go to Sylvie, and if they deal with it. If not, you have a 2/2 to help clear the board. Who knows? I don't know. I think it's fine. I think it's a good card. It's probably just needs more cooks to make it work better.
Yeah, and I think most tamer mains now are so focused on slimes, and rightfully so. But I just think it'll be a little while before they kind of circle back to the Ringleader.
Yeah.
So I've got one more water card before I let you go. I wanted to talk about the Fragmented Spirit of Water. This is an on-enter glimpse 6, and then you're going to draw 6. But it summons a Spirit Shard, which at level 3 will let you draw a card. So what do you think of the Fragmented Spirit?
I think it's hard to play. You have to definitely consider your deck construction around it. You have to consider the fact that you're on 6 influences is not a lot to work with.
It's cozy.
Yeah, and anything you do is, if they have any counterplay, if they have a Frostbind, there's no way to play around it, and that's what makes it feel bad. The power of just glimpsing 6 and making your hands more consistent, or digging for that piece you need for a certain archetype, I think is very good. Whereas the Serene Spirits, does the same thing, but you gain 6 life later on, but you lose your element. I think the fact that Fragmented Spirit Water lets you stay Spirit of water is very strong. Um, and then later on, if obviously this is played in a level 3 deck, unless you have some level manipulation and you can cache that fragment earlier, I think ideally it helps the level 3 strategies. Digging 6 probably help you find your dungeon guides a little bit sooner, and then you're still on par with the normal water spirit once you hit level 3. So I don't think it's obviously made for a certain archetype, right? It's not generically good, not that I can tell, and I think it has a little bit more restrictions, but if you build around it, I think it's fine. I've been trying it myself a little bit, just to find dungeon guides in general, or domains, or anything you need to set up, right? So maybe it's good finding potions for Arisana so you can enable your infusions. I think it's just good in general, but it's gonna take some time to make it like really good. I think Water Spirit is the base spirit for just any type of archetype, right? If you want to play control, if you want to play aggro, you want to play mid range, you probably want to play Water Spirit. The control decks, the control archetypes, you're just probably playing Fragmented or Serene. Who knows? Maybe the next spirit they'll have tailored towards aggro, which would be kind of scary because aggro itself is good already. So they probably won't do that. But
yeah, I don't know if aggro needs help. The thing for me is like I always like the idea of the Serene spirit, but when you build water, it's so hard to ever release that spirit because there are so many good water cards I want to toss in, especially with Imbue. For me, right. The Fragmented Spirit has felt great when I'm not playing a Water Mirror. The Water Mirror, if you're a Spirit of Water and I'm Fragmented, I feel like I'm at such a disadvantage there. Yeah, it just hurts so much.
Yeah, and plus you kind of have to build your deck on like very cheap cost cards, 2 and 1s, right? So that you could
you can still hold up the interaction with your diminished influence size.
Right, exactly. So it's just a little bit more of a deck restriction in building.
All right, Killy, I do want to thank you so much for coming on, running us the rundown of the State of Water. Do you have any closing thoughts for Water for Mercurial Hearts players you'd like to add on?
Closing thoughts. Cook. We need more cooks in the kitchen. I think that's about it. I think MRC is very exciting. All these cards are very cool to look at, and a lot of unexplored territory. Like you kind of have to wonder, like, why did the devs print a card like Hailstorm card or Enthralling Visage, right?
That was my spoiler card. So they sent me Hailstorm Guard, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, I just don't get it. Because I have no context, right? They sent me 3 cards. And I just keep staring at it. I'm like, I don't, and I still am kind of confused. I'm like, this, okay, I guess.
Or cards like Freezing Steel, right? That just seem like, an item comes into play tapped, right? Like it has a lot of niche applications, right? You can tap bullets, sure. Maybe you have a Bauble or a GCR come into play tapped, so they can't use it, right? Like, who knows? Maybe that's their intent. Yeah, I think MRC is very exciting. It's very cool to see what they thought of for the advanced cards for Neos, Astra, and Umbra. And so I'm really excited for Immortal Ambition too. But there's a lot of time before that happens, and so I think it's gonna feel a lot like AOC and FTC.
Okay.
Or Fracture Crown. I think towards the end of MRC, we're gonna be like, oh, there's this new deck we just finally discovered. I think it's gonna be one of those applications where people are like, oh, it feels like at the end of AOC season, there's like the meta could have evolved even more, but we kind of just got the new set and then we were off to a different race. So
yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of ground to explore. One of the appealing things about Grand Archive is it is so new, and it's one of the things I like so much. Like for Magic, and this isn't entirely true, but for Magic, things get solved so quickly, right? Because you have millions upon millions of players playing. For Grand Archive, people are discovering stuff all the time. We're such a smaller community, so I really like that. Like, we didn't even talk about Frost Shard. I think Frost Shard's really interesting from a design space. I think it'll be interesting how they utilize that moving forward. And there's probably some weird Frost Shard self-mill mage deck. I don't know.
I think Frost Shard is very strong. Talking about water allies, that kind of really push water mage allies a little bit more. Yeah, you can bubble mage them and Frost Shard for 4.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, Killy. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on, everybody. We're going to have a series of interviews here. We'll go through all the main elements. I think, Killy, thank you so much. Good luck in future endeavors. I know you won't be at Chicago, right? You'll be somewhere else?
Yep, I'll be at Gen Con. Unfortunately, that's the same weekend. Maybe, who knows? Maybe I'll crazy and drive 4 hours to Chicago to play. Probably not, but I think the next big event I'm preparing for are online regionals, because I don't have anything close by, and then after that, the next big ascent would be the one in December, whatever that is. I don't even think I'm going to Toronto, so I have a long ways before my next big event.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing whatever you come up with brew-wise. It's always exciting to see that. I'll see you online at some Yetis. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And until next time, everyone, cheers and happy gaming.